A very good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. It's my pleasure to welcome this prestigious audience to the Central Bank of Sri Lanka for another important public lecture. So today's public lecture, which is hosted by the Center for Banking Studies of Central Bank of Sri Lanka, is on a very timely topic, which is reshaping Sri Lanka's economic horizon with the port city. In fact, Colombo Port City was making news yesterday with the groundbreaking ceremony of the business center of the port city. So we have a lot of hopes as a country regarding this mega project. So today we have Mr. Sali Wickramasuriya, Chairman of Ceylon Petroleum Corporation and a member of the Colombo Port City Economic Commission, who will share his insights on potential of the Colombo Port City and its contribution to Sri Lankan economy. We warmly welcome you, sir, to the Central Bank of Sri Lanka. And Mr. Wickramasuriya is joined by Dr. Chandranath Amarasekara, Assistant Governor of Central Bank of Sri Lanka, on stage. As we extend a warm welcome to Dr. Amarasekara to the forum, may I also have the pleasure of inviting Dr. Amarasekara to deliver opening remarks for today's session, and also to invite our esteemed speaker today. Please welcome Dr. Chandranath Amarasekara, Assistant Governor of Central Bank of Sri Lanka.
Thank you, Kushan, and good afternoon to all of you. And welcome once again to the public seminar on reshaping Sri Lanka's economic horizon with the port city. And Sri Lanka's potential as a maritime hub is well known. We now find ourselves at a transformative juncture with the Colombo Port City. When built, this state-of-the-art international financial center could re-image Colombo as a regional services hub and a gateway to the vast potential of South Asia. This initiative has captured not only the attention of the Sri Lankans, but the attention of the entire world. And while acknowledging the potential for widespread economic impact, all of us have many questions. Can the port city unlock the influx of much needed foreign investment? Will this become the breeding ground for cutting-edge ideas? How will it integrate with the existing industries and empower local businesses? Will it create a wave of highly skilled jobs much needed to reverse the brain drain that we are seeing now? What are the risks involved? What are the risk mitigants? And this is just a taste of the discussion that we'll be having today. So for this discussion, as Kushan said, we are pleased to have a distinguished guest with us here today. And it's Mr. Sali Wickramasuriya, who is no stranger to Sri Lanka's public and private sectors. Mr. Wickramasuriya has an illustrious career spanning over 27 years in international oil and gas exploration with Schlumberger. Upon returning to Sri Lanka, Mr. Wickramasuriya actively supported and still supporting public and private sector initiatives, particularly in the areas of energy and investment promotion. In the public sector, Mr. Wickramasuriya provided his leadership to several key institutions. He directed the Board of Investment, Sri Lanka Ports Authority, and the Petroleum Development Authority as chairman. And naturally, his contributions extended to the Port City Economic Commission, where he served as the Director General and is currently a Commission member. He also chairs the Ceylon Petroleum Corporation at the moment, and the Ceylon Petroleum Storage Terminals Limited and Trincomalee Petroleum Terminals Limited. Mr. Wickramasuriya's commitment continued over the past 18 months as a part of the cabinet-appointed team of specialists advising the Honourable Minister of Power and Energy on crucial private power sector reforms. He currently chairs the National Gas Utilisation Master Plan Committee within the same ministry. Mr. Wickramasuriya's impact extends to the private sector as well. Since 2017, he has co-chaired the Energy Committee of the Ceylon Chamber of Commerce, and his expertise and guidance are also highly valued by several companies where he holds board positions. With that, let me invite Mr. Salih Wickramasurya to the podium to enlighten us on the potential of the Colombo Port City in reshaping Sri Lanka's economic future. And we can have a brief Q&A after his presentation. And over to you, Mr. Wickramasurya. Thank you.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Dr. Chandranath, thank you very much for the kind introduction and setting the right tone, in fact, for the discussion to follow. It is my pleasure to be in your company and share some thoughts about the topic up there, reshaping Sri Lanka's economic horizon with the port city. It's particularly timely for me because I am the only remaining member of the original Port City Economic Commission that was formed in May 2021. And the commission, the term of all the commission members comes to an end on the 31st of May 2024. And I actually appreciate the central bank's initiative in inviting me at this time because it could allow me to share a narrative with you that would perhaps put on record some of the issues that would be confronted by the future commission and hopefully not have to reinvent some wheels in going through some of the actions that we have done over the last few years. So I'll get right to it. We had a very challenging last 2 years, which has impacted all of us in different ways. Similarly, the Port City project also has different values in the eyes of different people. And that applies both within Sri Lanka and without Sri Lanka. What you're going to hear about are 5 lines I drew in my mind map, by which I hope to share a simplified version of the different challenges and opportunities that put together will hopefully address that question. So let's look at what this asset is. What is it? It's about 600 acres, I'm sure you all know that, of reclaimed land right next door. So it's in prime real estate location. It's a planned city. It's entirely under sovereign control. It belongs to the government of Sri Lanka. It was built for us as an investment by a Chinese company, CHEC, that actually reclaim the land and are in the process right now of putting together the horizontal infrastructure. That is to say the roads, the utility corridors, and other connectivity networks in the ground. The property, if we can call it that, is in what we call the area of authority as defined in the Port City Act. Why that is important, you will hear in a moment. The Port City project, the asset, is accompanied by an act, a piece of law, legislation. This piece of law applies specifically to the act by defining its application to those people who are doing business in and from the Port City. And there's a reason I'm clarifying all these things to you. So in order for the Port City law to apply to one has to be doing business in and from the Port City with the outside world and be classified as what we call an authorized person, or AP. Now what does that act say? That act establishes a jurisdiction, or rather, would I say a sub-jurisdiction within the overall sovereign laws of Sri Lanka, which is right next door. It is connected physically with no boundaries or no entry barriers other than right now because it's still a site. But it is distanced, separated legally and fiscally in certain ways. When the Port City Act first came out, people felt that this act was defining a territory in another country, as it were. But in fact, it's in Sri Lanka, it's connected to Sri Lanka, it belongs to Sri Lanka, it is owned by Sri Lanka. However, certain things that happen in that area of authority are as if they happen in another country. In other words, it's connected, but for some legal and fiscal or financial purposes, it is offshore. And that's an important concept to remember as we go through this discussion, or as you listen to me. If you just take that asset alone, it has an enormous intrinsic value. It has a lot more imputed value. There's a lot of value that can be generated from this asset. Now, in terms of where we are in our economic recovery, we would be lucky to have this asset as part of Sri Lanka's toolkit for economic recovery, even if we were not in need of economic recovery. This would be a very useful asset to leverage. Now that we are where we are and striving to get out of the constraints that our tight economy has brought upon us, it is very, very important if used in the right way. So here you go. Now, these are the stories that are associated with this project. Let's briefly start with the Act and how that separation occurs. There's a thing called the Port City Economic Commission Act, number 2020, I'm not even sure if it's 21 or 11, but of 2021. That Act empowers something called the Port City Economic Commission, of which I happen to be a member, to create an environment designed to achieve the following: attract foreign direct investment, increase ease of doing business, attract investment and knowledge transfer in key sectors. I think Dr. Chandranath referred to that. Encourage innovation and entrepreneurship, tourism, retail malls, ancillary services, leisure sector, and of course, underpinning it all, sustainable development. Those things are embedded in the Act, and those things are what the initial committee looked at as objectives for the commission, not committee, commission. The commission had to take steps to ensure that they did their job, to ensure that the objectives of the Act were met. So what did we do initially? This is a broad list of challenging objectives. Big FDI, knowledge job creation, knowledge transfer, attracting key sectors, brand names, all these things. Where do you start doing that? So this is even pre-economic crisis. We thought the best thing we would do would be to look at where these things are being done well in other parts of the world and benchmark ourselves against the best practices in those places. So what we did with the help of the project companies, financing of key international consulting firms, we looked at certain parts of the world where foreign direct investment was achieved rapidly and of high quality, where employment has been generated in large numbers, where administrative ease has been increased and ease of doing business index is high. So we've looked at actually 4 or 5 different jurisdictions, and from those we compiled regulatory briefs. In other words, now we have an Act, we have a commission, nothing more. So in order to operationalize the objectives of the Act, the commission must furnish it with regulations, which actually then mean something to people who are proposing to either be part of the investor community or the residential community of the port city. This took some time because no one place is good at all of these. So we had to look at different countries, different zones within different countries, pick out the best from each, put them together in the form of an overall brief, which we handed over to the consulting companies that were helping us to draft the regulations. Now this is where we encountered a few challenges. The first thing was in the actual act, it confers certain statuses on certain individuals, excludes certain legislation, includes certain legislation, and gives the Commission a responsibility. Let's start with the responsibility. That responsibility is introduced in the Act by giving the Commission the responsibility to be the single window facilitator. Now, you have heard that 100 times before. The BOI has been a one-stop shop, and this has been a single window. But I would like to put a slightly different slant on the single window facilitator mandate of the Economic Commission. Because remember all the things we have to achieve for us to be the government entity that enables foreign investors, local investors, residents, whoever, to achieve their business and social objectives, then we must act. We cannot simply facilitate, we cannot advise, we cannot guide, we actually have to act. This means, in simple terms, if you all were investors and you qualified to become an authorized person in the area of authority under the Port City Act, your problems become our problems. In other words, we don't connect you with somebody else, we don't advise you to go here or go there. Your problems become our problems now that you are in the community of authorized persons, and we solve them for you. Now, this is easier, much easier said than done. Because in 2021, when the Commission started its life, very few people had heard of the Commission. Hardly anybody had heard of the new city, the Port City Economic Commission Act. And what the Act sets out felt in many ways as if it was intruding on the jurisdiction and the turf of these various institutions. So now, for example, duty-free facilities for import of goods and services, residents, all that. Now, who do you think that raised the attention of? Sri Lanka Customs, who have subsequently given us a huge amount of support, having understood what we had to do. Then when you talk about visas for long terms, family and spouse visas, work visas for spouses, all these things, who do you think that alerted? The Department of Immigration and Immigration. They hadn't heard of this concept before. Neither did they initially bless it. But that too became completely reversed after some time, when now between the Sri Lanka Customs and the Department of Immigration and Immigration, we have a huge amount of collaborative support in achieving these objectives. I'll just give you two more examples of what the Commission was expected to do, what laws apply, then we'll move on to the next part. In the Act, there's a very last schedule called Schedule 3 that has 7 other well-known statutes listed as not applicable in the area of authority. So, for example, one of those is the municipal ordinance. One of them is the Board of Investment Act, BOI law. One of them is the TEWA, Termination of the Employment of Workmen's Act. Similarly, there are another 4 that do not apply. Now, that doesn't mean that the Commission can sit back and do what they want. The Commission is independent, but the Commission has responsibilities. If these particular laws do not apply, then furnish under their own law regulations which achieve those objectives in the area of authority. Then Schedule 2 lists 13 acts, including the Finance Act and so on and so forth, which are a series, customs ordinance, which are a series of acts from which the Commission can recommend exemptions and incentives. So in other words, in a certain process, now the Commission, while it has a lot of authority to create, it has almost no authority to implement. The Commission can achieve its objectives only by recommending. So what the Commission recommends goes through the channel of the associated line ministry to the Cabinet of Ministers, where the Cabinet of Ministers, and some of these things require the approval of the President himself, then take that to the Cabinet. We then achieve our objective, or not, as the case may be, and then get it approved, sent to Parliament for information. So the Commission cannot actually do anything on its own, but it has the power to create and recommend. So these 13 acts, the Commission has the authority to frame exemptions. That is how we can say, if you're going to invest in the port city, we can give you a 5-year visa. Your spouse can also come, your kids can also come, and your spouse can also work in the area of authority. Things like that. It's through exemptions there. Tax, personal income tax. This is a foreign part. This is overseas in some ways, I told you, and connected in other ways. National security applies. All the laws, all the law and all the peace, shall we say, all the law enforcement, Ministry of Defense, public security, law and order. All those rules apply within this place, but the currency is foreign. Either USD or INR, whatever it is. The currency of transactions between APs and outside who are operating in or from the port city is, for simplicity, let's call it USD. This then attracts a status from the Inland Revenue Department, from Customs, from a whole bunch of other stakeholders that otherwise regulate these activities, including the central bank. Now, that's the framing of the asset. Let's now move to the asset being there. Let's move to what the investor community is looking to achieve by investing here. So anybody wanting to come here, seeing all the potential, as Dr. Chandranath described, will need to have some security of investment. So investment security is an important part. This is in the Constitution against expatriation and, expropriation and nationalization and so on and so forth. It's also in the agreement that we provide to APs that we sign up. So it's the best we can do. We have given, by law, the best protection this government can give to any foreign investor. That's just the first part. The second part is they would want to know what happens when there's a problem. Now, if you have comfort in coming to a particular place, you go to a particular place, you'd want to know if somebody in that particular place is going to take care of you if you're having an argument, either between each other or with the government. So dispute resolution is a key part of the offer of this destination to overseas investors. Without adequate IP protection, things like that, dispute resolution, it's going to be a hard ask, no matter how beautifully we build it. So the Act looks at this in very simple terms. If there is a dispute between an authorized person and the Commission, that dispute must be resolved by arbitration. So there has to be an arbitration center associated with the port city for authorized persons in dispute with the government. If authorized persons are in dispute with each other, they are free to choose either the arbitration center or if they choose to take the litigation path. The government, the Ministry of Justice, has allocated notionally a fast-track port city-related court system, which is not there in physical terms, but it's notionally available to investors who wish to sue each other in Sri Lanka from the Ministry of Justice. So these two things, these two boxes we have ticked. The dispute resolution mechanism has been handed over to the Dispute Resolution Center. That's being run by a group of private sector eminent legal people here in Sri Lanka. It's in the World Trade Center. And the Ministry of Justice has very kindly allocated, notionally, some courts to be used on a day-by-day, as people you would expect in other countries, a very quick progression of something through the courts of law. The third thing people would expect is the freedom to do what they are able to do in Dubai or Singapore or wherever we compete with in terms of money. Now, this is where we come a slight, we had several discussions with the central bank, and I'll come to that in a moment. They bring money, they must be able to take it. They must not suffer any limitations on allowable debits or credits. They must not suffer any limitations on conversion or time binds. They must be able to bring in money and take it out. It's just a very fundamental, simple requirement if we are to achieve those objectives that you heard a bit before. Now, all these things were difficult to explain in the early days. People hadn't heard of the Act. People can see the project. People really couldn't understand why things weren't happening. Now, how many times, even today, people ask me socially, my friends, my family, whenever I meet them, how's Alia, how's it going? Are things happening in the port city? This is a very common question. Now, the answer, as you will see at the end of this, is not straightforward because there are many, many, many moving parts. So these are basic investor expectations: safety and security of investment, resolution of disputes, complete freedom of financial transactions. Because here's the thing, the Port City Act requires foreign capital to come in from foreign sources, not from local banks. So people cannot raise money to invest in the port city from local banks. So the banking system of Sri Lanka is actually ring-fenced from any transaction that takes place offshore. And that introduced some initial complications, which I won't go into now. They have been resolved. But now let's go to the third line on this thing, my mind map, which is challenges to the project. So first we had what the project is, how it is structured, what freedoms and liberties it has. Secondly, we had what does the investor expect and how does that investor, shall we say, take the decision to enter Sri Lanka and take a stake in the port city. Third, now let's look at the challenges. And the challenges mostly come from either lack of knowledge of the project or false narratives. Now, what do I mean by a false narrative? A false narrative is a story that somebody else says about something which is not true. So there were many false narratives. There was the famous colony narrative, referring to this could be a colony of certain people in Sri Lanka. Then there was the military narrative. This is a part of strategic interest of certain countries to establish military bases here in Sri Lanka. Lastly, there was the no Sri Lankans are allowed in the port city narrative. You must have heard that in the early days. So these are the narratives that we had to deal with as the Commission to fix these perceptions. Now, it's quite easy to fix the perception of the colony part because this is a planned city with planned activities and international branding. That was actually quite easy to put down. The next thing was, how do you deal with the military part? Now, that's less obvious, but anybody who now can enter into the port city will fully understand that the only military activity that can be conducted there is if you have an army, navy, and air force of drones. And if you do, you don't need the port city for that. So there is no military potential of that particular property. Lastly, the no Sri Lankans are allowed without visas and all that narrative, we dealt with by opening the doors to everybody. Now, why would people go in there? We had to create an attraction in there. A beach park, a beach club, go-karting. These are all temporary activities. These are not what the port city was built for, or the ground was reclaimed for. These are temporary activities designed to create footfall, to build awareness and dispel perceptions that Sri Lankans are not allowed to enter the port city. So that's just the first challenge. That is the narrative challenge. Then we had the actual product itself that is a little bit of a challenge. You have all these plots. There are plots for this, plots for that, plots for marina, plots for entertainment and leisure, plots for convention. Many other countries we compete with are able to build on those plots and offer these plots on a lease basis. Sri Lanka had no money to build this. The infrastructure development aspect of the company that invested in it was only for horizontal development. So if we, as the Commission, want something to happen upwards, then we have to find at least 3 or 4 different components. One is, because it's a planned city, one is you want an investor. Well, take a school, for example. You want an investor. Let me start with the other side. A school first requires a brand, because if you don't have a brand, you're not going to be able to attract students from overseas and Sri Lanka into this place. People will come after a brand. Brands typically don't invest. Brands actually charge management fees, and brands lend their names and certification to a project which somebody else has to spend money on. Brands are actually a cost, but a cost worth bearing because we want the brand. Now, who's going to put the money down? So you have to find a brand. Then you have to help the brand find an investor. When the brand and investor get together, somebody has to operate this. The brand, let's call it Eton or Harrow, is not going to send their #1 A-grade teaching staff to Sri Lanka to start up a new school. So they need to find within the community here or just close by people who can operate a school. So already you have 3 separate people that need to be found to actually build something on the port city. You need the brand, you need the investor, and you need the operator. The last component is, how do you manage the cost, the upfront cost? What do you do with the land? I mean, even if you were to take, never mind the port city, but even over here, there's 100 purchase somewhere here in the, say, next to the bank, central bank. That's going to cost a lot of money. How do you finance that? So those 4, the land availability, let's call it, the brand, the operator, and the money had to be found, and that was the Commission's primary objectives, is to set up a system by which this could be done. This is how we started doing it first. Now just let me step back a moment to say that the law permits people to buy property, land, in Sri Lankan rupees. But that's all. You can't build, and this is in the law, and don't ask me, you can't build vertically with Sri Lankan rupees. You can buy land with Sri Lankan rupees. Some land is to be sold by the project company, because remember, they invested, the guys that reclaim the land. How do they get their recovery of investment? They have been given leasehold rights for certain parts. It's the leasehold rights that they can monetize, either in the short term by selling that leasehold right to some other developer, or in the long term by investing themselves, building vertically, and then monetizing it over a period of time. That's the land parcels allocated on lease to the project company. Now the government also owns some of it. How can the government attract? How can the government help in those 4? Government becomes the landowner in a government plot. Brand is there, investor is there, operator is there. Then the government needs to take some steps to alienate the land on lease for the project. This is not an easy decision that people in Sri Lanka will take, let me tell you that. Everyone's looking for benchmarks, everyone's looking for norms, everyone's looking for standards in a place where there aren't. This place requires us to think a little bit out of the box in terms of creative structuring of finance. Because that actually is where it all starts. If you don't have the money to finance the land, you can't then build the project, and it goes on from there. So these are just, remember, this is branch 3 challenges. Let's touch basically on this single window facilitation one more time. I mentioned it as part of the Act as a requirement. How do you actually do it? If I, as actually happened, went to a particular department and they said, and we said, ladies and gentlemen, you are required to assist us to provide support to investors who apply here, because this is what you do. And their answer is, who are you? What do you want? And we are not we don't see the port city in our list of counterpart organizations. So that's where you start. Eventually, you achieve this target of single window facilitation in 3 ways, actually. One is when it's dictated by law. So then you show Act it's in the Act. Then it's a slow process. The other one is by discussion, negotiation, and understanding captured in contract. So you have law, then you contract. You have a contract with, say, for example, the Department of Immigration and Immigration. When I say a contract, I mean an agreement, a service agreement. The third thing, which is very prevalent right now, is just goodwill and cooperation. Now that people know about the port city and they know about the project, which by the way will soon change its name to the International Financial and Tech City, they will help us because they know the challenges we face. Sometimes it's entirely on an informal basis, but goodwill and cooperation. Lastly, there is a misunderstanding of our objectives and what we are supposed to do, who we are supposed to do it for, who are the stakeholders. And this gets escalated all the way up to oversight committees, COP committees, COP-F committees, where our team members and commissions have been brought in front of to defend various things. Some of them have been completely justified, some of them have not been. But underpinning that whole thing is a lack of, and that I take as a failure on the part of the Commission, of clearly communicating what we intend to do, how we intend to do it, and why we intend to do it. This is perhaps a mistake on our side. So that's the item number 3. Item number 4 is how we went through this process from day one. Now, going back to the Act does not require a company incorporated in Sri Lanka to operate here. It does not. It simply allows the company registrar of companies to license a company. So a company must have a license somewhere else in the world, an incorporation somewhere else in the world, UK, India, wherever, it doesn't matter, Malaysia, Singapore. And then that company is registered in Sri Lanka by the Registrar of Companies, given a separate PV number, and this applies, by the way, even for companies that are registered in Sri Lanka, and then that fulfills that requirement. The same thing applies to banking. Now here's the thing, Port City Commission cannot issue licenses. Banking licenses, or any, for that matter, company incorporation or company registration documents are issued by the relevant authorities. Banking licenses are issued, I believe, by the Monetary Board. However, any bank who has a license to operate anywhere in the world can operate in the port city. So the prerequisite is you already have to be a licensed bank. Herein came up small issues. Who's to regulate what? Now, these are people who possibly don't exist in Sri Lanka as banking entities, coming into Sri Lanka, physically connected, but financially segregated and legally segregated. How do they operate? Vis-a-vis the gross national reserves, the hierarchy, as I understand it, and please forgive me if I'm wrong, is there is the finance minister at the top, and then the finance ministry underneath that, then the governing board, And under the governing board, there's the central bank as the regulator. Now, in framing regulations proposed to attract foreign investment, we had initially proposed a different approach because of the different nature of the challenge. We had proposed that under the board of governors, the monetary board, I would say, under the monetary board, there was a branch, one branch being the central bank, the other branch being a yet to be defined Financial Services Regulatory Commission, which is supported by the central bank, but functioning under a different set of regulations. That was the initial thought. Why? Because the objective of these people is to, simply put, please forgive me, I'm not a banker or an economist, is to attract money that is not here into Sri Lanka for the purpose of development and investment. One of the objectives of the central bank, apart from its other monetary policy responsibilities, is to prevent leakage of money that is here outside. It's highly possible, in my humble opinion, that these two cannot be done by the same regulation. Because one is designed to prevent, the other one is designed to attract. And right now we are still, I believe, in the process of unraveling this confusion about what is more important. Is it more important to prevent money from here going somewhere else? Or is it more important to bring money that is not here from somewhere else here? And but we have 2 months or 3 months left of our time in the commission. We hand that challenge to the next generation of commissioners. These are just examples. There are many, many. Now the fourth one. Sorry, we are on the fourth one. And the last part of this I want to say, because I've taken a lot of your time and I want to quickly go to the wrap-up and take some questions, is how do you approach this? Now, remember, all we have is bare land. Plots of bare land. Plots of bare land, they require an investor, they require a brand, they require an operator, and they require cooperation from the person whose land they're leasing. If that person is the project company, that person has certain financial standards that have to be met. Purchase, most likely. If the leaseholder of the land is the government has the flexibility to adopt certain regulations. But then how do you do that? Alienate land for a project, and then what is your recourse if the project does not perform? How do you get people out and offer that again? So all these things are quite difficult to manage because most projects fail for lack of funds. Most projects fail for lack of funds. Most big international investments. So therefore, we have taken a different approach now. Instead of the piecemeal, block-by-block marketing and discussion approach, we have been approached actually by entities who say, look, you guys are doing it the wrong way. You need to first find the money. When you find the money, you can then piece that up into different projects and take stake in different projects, underwrite different projects. And we think there's a lot of logic in that. If there's a fund set up somewhere in the world that attracts funding, investment, let's even say some kind of almost like a unit trust, for the purpose of investing in the port city, that fund could help us solve many of these problems because that is the fund who knows the project, who's collecting money on behalf of the project, who is giving assurances to people whose money it is collecting, and at the same time has visibility of the different commercialities of the different projects and the different granular bits and pieces with which they can negotiate they can use funds to solve that problem. So that is now the new look of the Commission, is looking at finding money first and then the rest of it. I think from our point of view, we also think that while it's a planned city, the city is planned because we had envisaged that it's sold one by one, piece by piece, but that introduces a sequencing problem. Who's going to come here if there's no school for their kids, for example? Or everything is interlinked. So ideally, this city should just magically appear, but it doesn't do that. And that's the challenge when you look at sequencing this project, how do you prioritize and how do you attract and how do you overcome all these other challenges in actually achieving vertical construction? So let's come to the last 5 minutes, which are just about what needs to happen next. So I think the first thing is, to future commissioners, we would say that don't bother going down these roads. We've already been down them. A certain amount of collaboration and reputational connection has been achieved. A certain amount of regulatory briefing has been achieved. Some regulations also have been published. I'll give you another regulation that's still sticking. It is when you, let's say, for example, when you go to, and I'll leave it just at this. If you go to Singapore and you set up a company there, Singapore is a competitor with us for this purpose in this little way. We are tiny, they're giants. But nevertheless, our people can go there, open a company, hire people, and fire people the next day. There are rules. It's not as easy as I just said. But they're not forced to pay statutory payments. And they're not forced to take on burdens that have a financial impact that reduces the financial viability of their, commercial viability of their project. So we have to sort these things out collectively, which brings me that stakeholder alignment is my first thing that needs to be done. We have to all, and we means the government of Sri Lanka, must understand that in order to achieve the objectives and reap the benefits of reshaping our economic tool, it's a tool, then we must all align and sing off the same hymn sheet. This is not happening yet. Different institutions have different perceptions of the port city, and it changes. And when you have a new set of commissioners coming to you, you will have a similar group of changes. So government cohesiveness is important. We must all be the one government. We must also do things differently. I mean, we must do things differently. We can't apply the same standards that we do here to control certain things to a place that we are asking foreign people to come in with their money and invest. I think that's fairly obvious. But none of this is happening easily, only on the basis of personal connections and relationships and all that stuff. And all this is because we don't really have a proper, I use the word champion in the government. The Port City doesn't have a champion. The Port City has a commission, an economic commission, which meets once a month. But it doesn't really have somebody who goes to the world and talks about it from the government, from high up in the government. We need that. That would take care of all the other interdepartmental issues if we can align ourselves at a very high level and say, look, this is Sri Lanka, this is the project, this is the international business and tech city, and we are all government departments here to support it in whatever way we can, and give the commission the freedom to recommend within its mandate. It can't act, as I said to you before. So I think in summary, I would say that it is a tool not just for economic advancement, ladies and gentlemen, it's a tool for complete administrative transformation. If we do things right in the port city, that model, that administrative model, that inclusive governance model, the community rules, all those things can be transported to other parts of Sri Lanka and potentially exported, because here we are combining the best of Sri Lanka, which is everything you have around us, with the best-in-class approach from different parts of the world. If we can get that together, then I think we can leapfrog certain economic obstacles and crises. That requires complete coherence within the government and messaging at a very high level. And we hope that this is the theme for the future. So it's just like any tool, whether it's blunt or sharp. The outcome of using a tool is dependent on the wisdom, skill, and timing of the craftsman. And that craftsman is the government of Sri Lanka, not just the commission. Thank you.